In this lecture class, we're going to turn to the Late Bronze Age and talk about the period in Greece where the Trojan War took place. The Trojan War being the war against from by the Greeks, um, although they didn't call themselves Greeks at that time. Greece was not unified, but it was just a bunch of city states. But a bunch of city states um, under the king of Agamemnon at Mycenae, went to avenge an insult of his brother by a prince from Troy. Basically, he stole his wife Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, and started the Trojan War, which Homer's two books discuss. The Iliad being about the wrath of Achilles, just one little part of the Trojan War, and then the Odyssey about Odysseus's return from Ithaca to an island on the west coast of Greece, from Troy to Ithaca, an island on the west coast of Greece. But we're not going to talk about Ithaca. Interestingly enough, no palace of Odysseus has been found. But we have found the palace of Agamemnon in the red there at Mycenae, and Pylos or Pylos, the palace of Nestor, and indeed Troy. Uh, and this period, the Late Bronze Age, is approximately around 1500 to 1000 BC. That's not exactly right, and I'm sure your textbook's more precise. It's probably more around 1100 or so BC. Depends on when you think the Trojan War was fought, but for our purposes, that's close enough. And we're going to be talking about four different archaeological sites of this period. Mycenae and Tiryns that I'll talk about today in the red, Pylos or Pylos on the lower left in the orange, and then Troy in the blue on the upper right. And we call the Late Bronze Age also the Mycenaean period. Now, the Middle Bronze Age, remember, is pretty much dominated by the larger island of Crete on the very south, to the southern, at the bottom of the slide. But we believe the Mycenaeans or the mainlanders conquered Crete and took control, and then were eventually found themselves at war with the city of Troy on the upper right there. These sites were excavated by the archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, not Pylos, but Troy and Mycenae. He was a German businessman of the 19th century who made a lot of money in international business. He was quite good at it because he could speak many, many languages. And after he made a whole bunch of money, he devoted himself to excavating the sites of mentioned in Homer. What's interesting about this is that, for the most part, archaeologists up to that point thought that Homer was, a very interesting poet, a very good poet, and a fun read, but it was primarily mythology. And he would go out to prove that these were real places. Now, of course, he cannot prove that the sort of specific events of the Trojan War, but there was a Troy and a Mycenae. Although, as we'll see, Mycenae was really not ever lost, but Pylos was, and Troy to a certain extent. But he would prove their existence in the 19th century, and really be one of the founding fathers of prehistoric archaeology in the region. He would marry a Greek by the name of Sophia, and they would dig these sites in Greece and basically start this whole field of Aegean prehistory. We will first go to Mycenae, which was on the map in the red earlier. It is a citadel. Now, a citadel is a city on a hill that is fortified. Now, it's not really a city is a bit too strong of a word, because the majority of the population probably lived outside the walls, but they would go inside the walls when there was an attack. The royalty at this time, um, and we know this from the Iliad and the Odyssey, or it's confirmed, the royalty were the ones that fought the wars. It was a sign of honor and prestige, and allowed them to tax. The royalty could tax the people. And they'd build these large walls and protect the people at times uh, of attack. And you can see there on the hilltop there these large walls that protect this citadel. On the top is a palace. I'll show you in later lectures. Um, and this will serve as a model for when we talk about some other palaces, uh, oh, or citadels, I should say, not palaces, citadels in the region. Here is a reconstruction of what it might have looked like at the time, and we can see once again this large wall underneath the tip of the site there, and then a bigger bit of a lower town. But they hold a lot of the interesting tombs that we'll be talking about. And here is a layout of Mycenae, a plan of it. And you can see on the bottom right the progression of structures that were built. Starting with the blue, which was first, then the red. This big area that we'll see is protects the Lion Gate, and that circle on the left is called the grave circle, A. And we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about the entrance in the upper left there called the Lion Gate, and then the grave circle. And then eventually we'll get to the top of the hill there, where you can see that little structure in red, which is a megaron, a big room is what it means in Greek. And I'll come back to that. On the upper right, that area in orange that was added later on because that protected a cistern that obviously one would need under attack. One of the major strategies you had when you were besieging a city is just to wait it out, and see how much food and water they had. So having a water source was really important to defending these cities. And we'll also see that unlike the Minoan palaces, the Mycenaean citadels were highly fortified, suggesting quite militaristic society. We will talk once again about I'm going to talk about the walls around the site, and then to the upper left there, that main gate into the site, and then it'll immediately pass the grave circle, and then you climb up a hill to the palace megaron, or the palace itself, on the very top. I want you to pay attention to the shape of this gate, the Lion Gate on the upper left, and the little projection that sticks out on the left-hand side. And here's a modern photograph and a reconstruction. The purpose of the projection, which is on your right-hand side of this slide, coming out, is that you could line the entranceway with, let's say, spearsmen or archers or whatever, and attack invaders from both sides. When you went into battle, you had to carry your weapon in one hand, your spear or your sword, and then you had a shield in the other. And this made it difficult to protect both sides of your body. And so they would put, if they could put defenders on both sides of you when you tried to attack, this made things all the more difficult. And it funneled the people through the attackers through this one gate. Now, one word I need you to know is cyclopean, Coclopean, as in by the Cyclopses. And this was actually an ancient word given to this architecture because these massive, massive stones are so big that the ancients thought that only a Cyclops, this mythological giant, could have stacked them up. And it is very impressive. A couple of things. First of all, notice that those two blocks are alike. They're made to fit. Oh, and by the way, this is called ashlar masonry. and meaning that it's faced and and cut to fit. Um, and notice that there's no cementing agent in between the blocks. They are held purely. They're held together purely by the weight of the blocks. And then we have this entranceway with our typical post and lintel structure here for sort of the basics of architecture, with the door, the two posts on the sides, and the lintel block, in this case arched, the lintel block going over top. And what we see above it is what's called a relieving triangle. Um, and the and I'll show you examples of this in other structures. Now, what this does is the heavy weight of the blocks do not sit upon the center of the lintel block and cause it to break. Uh, they put instead a sculpture of these two lions. I'll come back to that in a moment. Two lions of a much lighter stone on top. And this relieving triangle pushes what's called the thrust, the weight of the structure, off over the posts of the doorway. And notice the arch of the lintel block also pushes the weight or directs the weight down there. And so this is an architectural structural advance that they've now decorated with this sculpture in the inside. By the way, it's called corbelled vaulting. If we were to take this sculpture out and just have the triangle there, you can see that each rock, as we go up one level, sticks into the triangle a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and eventually they would hit together. And this is called corbelled vaulting. It's not real vaulting in the sense of an arch that we'll see with the Romans, where it has a keystone, etc., a true arch. This is a false arch, but it has the same effect. And here's a close-up of it, just to give you an idea of the impressiveness of these blocks. Each were many, many, many tons. And so this is a great architectural feat, and must have impressed greatly the locals when they would come into the structure and see it. Here is another shot that shows you how it was earlier on when Schliemann first started digging it, with some people to give you an idea of the general size of it. And you can see that a lot of it was actually exposed prior to Schliemann, so people knew it was there. And in fact, I mean, the ancients were the ones that gave it the name the Lion Gate, because they even saw the lions in it. But it'd be Schliemann who would recognize that this is the Bronze Age citadel where Agamemnon lived. So we get, let's talk about this sculptural relief on the, or relief sculpture in the relieving triangle above the lintel block. It shows two lions who are now missing their faces, but we know they had faces from the ancient texts, and they probably faced out towards us, and we believe they were made of some sort of bronze. Now, what's important here is these lions focus in on a column. And I briefly mentioned this in earlier lectures, but this is a Minoan column. It gets wider as it goes up. You don't know this because I haven't discussed it yet, but the column is on a base, and on the foundation of the base has those two little platforms there. Those are actually Minoan altars. Now, then these lines face a Minoan column. And what we believe here is that, because we know the Mycenaeans basically occupied Crete, that this was perhaps a symbol of their conquest of the island, the column representing Minoan architecture, and the lions, the Mycenaeans. Notice the symmetry of the design, and in some ways, sort of it's almost heraldic looking. Heraldic means, like a seal of an official family or a royal family, and that it is showing strength. These lions have conquered Crete, which was the biggest power in the Middle Bronze Age. But into the Late Bronze Age, we'll see the mainlanders become much more powerful. We call them Mycenaeans based on the namesake from the Iliad and the Odyssey, but they were all individual city states. Mycenae just happened to lead the war against the Trojans because Agamemnon's younger brother Menelaus the had his wife stolen from him by Paris, the Trojan prince, who was visiting Menelaus, who was then king of Sparta, um, and was a royal guest, but not being a very nice guest, he abducted his wife Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Some accounts of ancient accounts have her, being raped, basically, as her being abducted against her will. Other sources say she went willingly. Homer has pretty much the latter, saying she went willingly. Um, in any case, this is Agamemnon's capital here. And when you go through the line gate, the first thing you come across on the right is a grave circle, which I'm going to talk more about in later on the lecture in upcoming classes, because the graves there were rich in finds. But notice that it's a large grave circle as soon as you walk through the gate. And what this does is it tells us that when you're entering, there's a large royal family here, and they've been kings for a while, because you would have seen the grave markers of these kings. And they were telling you as soon as you walked in, we've been here a long time, we've been ruling for a long time. And so the grave circle and the gravestones in it were in some cases propaganda. And as you can see too, there's even a little walkway around the graves. So when people came to the site, one of the first things they'd do is they'd walk around this little in-wall, in-house cemetery, and that sends the message. I'll come back to that later. What I want to talk about first are some other types of graves that are on the road leading up to the Lion Gate, and therefore also, symbolic and a bit of propaganda. And these are called it's called a tholos tomb, and I'll show you a plan of it in a little bit. But basically, what it was a big domed interior, and a dome is important because we'll see domes here, and then we won't see them again until the Roman period. And these are not true domes, just like the arch is not a true arch. It doesn't have any keystones, etc. But nevertheless, it's a pretty large advance on the architecture. And so there would be this large chamber. It would be covered over with dirt, and then even this entranceway would be filled in. So though we see it now, and I said it was propaganda. In fact, the ancients wouldn't have seen the gate. They would have seen the large tumulus, the mound of dirt, and known what was underneath it. But these are quite large. For example, on the if you look at the stones on the posts on the right and left of the door, I'm about as tall as 2 or 3 of those, to give you an idea of the height. And this is also Cyclopean masonry, with a relieving triangle. We have some of these hints of decoration, especially from this site. Some people have argued here that the relieving triangle these ones were filled in with decorative reliefs that we no longer have. It's hard to know. But just to give you an idea of what it looked like. More importantly, when we walk in, we see this wonderful domed structure. There's a little side room as well where we see a smaller doorway with a small relieving triangle. But I want you to pay attention to the size of that lintel block over the doorway on the right. Look at the enormous size of it. Just massive. This is really impressive architecture. And it's smoothed off, and it's still standing to this very day. Once again, I'm about as tall as 2 or 3 of those rows of blocks on the bottom. And so you can see that these are very, very impressive royal graves. Unfortunately, at Mycenae, all were looted. There's only one down at Pylos that was excavated before it was looted. But these were all looted and looted in antiquity because they were probably full of rich with gold, etc. Indeed, the epithet that Homer used for Mycenae, that is to say, a saying, a descriptive saying that goes along when you say the city of Mycenae is rich in gold, Mycenae. Um, the Trojans were known for their management of horses, so it was horse breaking Troy or rich in gold, Mycenae. There are several of these tombs as we go up to the Lion Gate, but they give us sort of the basic idea of what the Lion Gate is doing. And here is a plan of one of these Thoros tombs. These were quite popular in the late Bronze Age, but they were certainly only for royalty. There are other types of much cheaper graves, cis graves, etc. This would have just been for royalty and leading up to the gate of Mycenae. And on the bottom plan, you can see the large dromos or walkway to the doorway, and then the domed area on the left, sort of a beehive shape, and then the other room to the right. So we get through the Lion Gate, and we're immediately presented with this grave circle. The Lion Gate would be, it's off the slide, but on the left. And if you go straight ahead, you hit those steps, and then a pathway to the top of the site where the citadel is. But first, you're going to see this large circle of graves. And here is a reconstruction of what it looked like. The people there give you an idea of just the size we're talking about. And once again, you could have, this was meant there to be, to show off to a certain extent for people. It was even an entranceway so people could walk around it. First thing you see when you walk into the site. And here's just another shot of it, better shot of the entranceway there as well. Just to give you an idea, once again, you've seen a human being to give you an idea of just how impressive this is. Schliemann excavated here after he excavated Troy. I'll come back to Troy later on. And it basically proved that Homer was not making everything out of whole cloth. In other words, his stories were not mythology, but they were legends. Now, the difference between a myth and a legend is a myth is basically totally made up, but a legend has some basis in history. The example I like to use is, we all learn the story of, George Washington, picking the cherries from the cherry tree, and then asked if he did it. He said, "I cannot tell a lie." Almost surely that didn't happen. But we tell the story to our children as, hey, look, you shouldn't lie. Our founding fathers didn't even lie. Now, George Washington is real. Whether that story is or not is uncertain. But that's sort of how legends work. It's not straight out mythology. It's based in some historical fact, but it's been embellished. So he proves this, and he excavates these graves, and he finds one interesting thing that he finds are these spectacular blades, sort of long dagger blades that are missing their handles. And they are inlaid with gold and what's called electrum, which is a mixture of silver and gold. And we can see running lions on the ones on the top, and then the middle one, a lion hunting other animals. And on the bottom, what's called the lion hunt, and I'm going to focus on this one. I do want to point out, too, that these were most likely never really used. These were just ceremonial, something the king would wear to show off his power, wealth, and strength. And these were buried in tombs with these people we believe to be the royalty of Mycenae. We'll focus on the bottom one here. And there are two sides to it. And the general composition is we see five men hunting three lions. One man has fallen. The lion on the right charges away. The one in the middle charges away but looks back. And the third one attacks and takes down that one man. And we see here two types of shields that the men use, figure eight shields and what are called tower shields. I'll come back to those in a moment. On the other side, we see five stags. As opposed to the five men on the upper left, we see five stags down here, four running away. Notice that the second from the right looks back, and two more run away, and then one has been caught by the lion. So it's a metaphor here, sort of the chain, the food chain of life. We hunt lions, lions hunt deers, or deer, I should say. I'm sorry. But it's pretty spectacular craftsmanship. And it's inlaid into this black paste. It's called a Niello design, Niello. Niello is an Italian word for just meaning like the Nile, because it was so black that they said it was like the Nile. I don't get the analogy straight out, but in any case, that's with a technique that's being used here. And it's a very sort of Mycenaean technique. Now let's look at the one in more detail on the top. We see here these five men, one has fallen. And they're all using, well, let's see, three of them are using spears, one guy has fallen, and then the other guy shoots a bow and arrow. I want to point out something, there's no way you would know this, but take my word for it, is that the kilts they are wearing are not Mycenaean kilts, but Minoan kilts. And so it's believed that this might be Minoan craftsmanship, but buried at Mycenae. So sort of maybe perhaps things that the mainlanders, the Mycenaeans, took from Crete. And that has been confirmed by even more recent finds from Pylos, which I'll show you in a later lecture. But we do see, too, that the one guy has fallen. Now, we see the figure eight shields. On the left, we see it from the back, and the second from the right, we see from the side. And we can see it's blotchy black and white. And that's because it was covered over with a cattle hide. The leather would cover the wooden shield, and give it great protection. So that's what's being shown there in these figure eight shields. These figure eight shields are quite good because you have a problem when you go to battle with those square-shaped shields, or rectangular, I should say, shields that are called tower shields. Because if you want to, throw a spear or shoot your bow and arrow, well, more throw a spear, you have to set it aside to throw it, or even with a sword, fighting with a sword, you would. Now, the figure eight shield gives you those little indentations right about waist height. So you could put your sword through there but still be protected. And we can see, too, that they're arched, so they would surround the body when fighting. And we saw these figure eight shields painted on the walls at the Minoan palaces, sort of saying, this is where you hang it, sort of like your dad's tool. Not your toolbox, but the place where he worked, and there would be, drawings on the wall of which tool went where, on what nail. And so we see this concept of men hunting lions. It's pretty certain now that lions did exist in Greece at the time. It was a matter of debate when I was a graduate student, but they have found bones of lions. And so these are depicting real events, not purely mythological ones, or ones that at least they knew of well enough to accurately depict the lion. And once again, this is gold and electrum inlaid in bronze, and not meant for battle, but just meant for display. Another thing we find, or Schliemann, I should say, found in the grave circle were these gold masks. And these are just very thin pieces of gold. They're basically, it's like aluminum foil, but it's gold foil, but it's that soft and thin. And you impress it over the face to give you an idea of what the person looked like. There are several examples, and we see the ones on the bottom, which are pushed over faces. The one in the center sticks out more than the ones on the right and left. Um, and these look to be, pressed over true faces. Perhaps the eyeballs had to be, decorated a bit to make them real. Our Mask of Agamemnon, which it wasn't Agamemnon's mask, by the way. That's Schliemann's identification and a mistake. It predates Agamemnon by a few hundred years. But in any case, back to the mask, we can see that this is probably not impressed on the face. First of all, the eyebrows and the mustaches wouldn't have come out that well as the eyelids. And it looks to have been made and then placed over the face. And you see that little hole on the bottom. And there are other holes on some other examples that shows that these were tied to a hood that covered the body. He calls this one the Mask of Agamemnon because it had a beard. Agamemnon had a beard, and it's certainly the best one out of all those that are preserved, but it wasn't Agamemnon's. But notice also the gold, and this is a lot of gold to put into a tomb, which means you've taken that gold out of circulation, and this is a lot of gold, and and every king got one. Here's another example. This is a bit more realistic of how it was pressed over the face. That looks just like a real face rather than sort of an idealized face as we saw the Mask of Agamemnon. But nevertheless, he found them both. And back to Agamemnon's mask, we can see here that it's sort of arched on the right. You can see that. And covered the face, and once again was tied onto a cloak. And we're seeing, sort of portraiture of a person, as well as sort of, the respect that they are paying to the dead. And remember, this person is also in this grave circle. It's not for everybody, but for royalty. And this shows us that the burials must have been quite elaborate and rich in order to have such amount of gold placed on their face. So I will stop there for now, and we will talk about more finds from the grave circle in the next video.